Thank you so much, Omar. Such a pleasure having you here. Thank you so much for accepting my invitation and to be on the show, The X Monks Tribe.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Shukran. While going through your profile and everything that I've heard about you from the common friends, I consider you as an authority in the space of leadership development, executive coaching. And above that, I think the beautiful human being that you are. Just curious, how did you get introduced to the world of leadership development?
Thank you. Uh, should I start from a moment when I was born?
Wherever you would like to begin.
Yeah, no, I think that it's of course it's a journey, right? And all the experiences that I have had as as a young child, as a teenager, then kind of transitioning to adult life, have contributed to this probably awakening that is a function of a place and is a function of people. And it just kind of is a perfect constellation of, kind of, I call it an awakening moment, right? Uh, Using the analogy from Buddhism. And I think in that regard, that awakening took place when I attended my grad school in 2012, exactly 10 years ago, and where um, there were few professors, including Professor Heifetz and Professor Dean Williams, who have really helped me kind of see the power of this perspective taking and the power of acquiring these new pairs of lenses uh, towards the world, but also most importantly towards myself. And I think that I would call as the moment of kind of finding myself and really having an opportunity to retrospectively reassess a lot of things that I had done before through a different prism. And of course, coming to a reckoning with the fact that a lot of things that I thought as achievements and successes that were just mere illusions, and there's always a room to improve them, and they have a fair share of failures, but also a fair share of important insights to go forward. So, kind of in a roundabout of way of answering your question, this was probably the space and the moment when I was able to discover the power of leadership. Leadership not in a conventional way, but more in a sense of practice
Yeah, yeah.
that we really need to use to change who we are, change our communities, but change not in a kind of forced way, but to help people basically
Mm.
find their better selves and improve their predicaments.
Yeah, thank you. I think, Umar, that's what a teacher does. He doesn't only provide you the necessary tool set and the skill set and the theoretical knowledge, and of course the practical applications, but I think a good teacher keeps you grounded as well. And in such a beautiful, simple way, you could bring in the practical aspects of leadership, not only at an individual level or the team level, but the community level, at the nation level. And you could actually bring in the concept of awakening. So thank you for that. And of course, who better than Ronald Heifetz can talk about that? I've been influenced by his work, and he has been a great teacher. Umar, just curious, right? You've been considered as an authority in the space of adaptive leadership. Now, how would you define adaptive leadership? And if you can give a few examples of adaptive leaders and the kind of impact that they've been able to create in the world, so that I would be able to relate to that, so that the audience would be able to relate to so called adaptive leadership and adaptive leaders.
Thank you. I think that in the current turbulent, unpredictable, um, and a highly volatile world, we need more uh, self-empowered, responsible agents, people. We live in a world where we have so many uncertainties that it's no longer possible that one person or a group of individuals can actually hold, so to speak, the truths about how things are in this world. So the world is highly dispersed and highly decentralized. And in this kind of world, the most important thing is to ensure that every individual can actually contribute to um, to basically living a better life. And I think this is the fundamental premise of the adaptive leadership, which is uh, helping or mobilizing people to reduce the gap between the current reality, whatever the reality is, because we are always facing challenges, and the aspiration of that better self, better community, better world, in a clear, sustainable manner.
Got
So
it.
this is, very briefly what adaptive leadership is. And if you indulge me, uh, I intentionally am staying away from using the word leader as a noun. Uh, of course, in colloquial language, you do need to kind of use that language, use the noun as a leader, uh, and coming from, you know, late from Sanskrit as the person who holds the flag in the front, who generally dies because you're flag bearer at the beginning. I think the notion of adaptive leadership is to actually empower people to be smarter in helping people mobilize themselves in a way that actually these people survive and live a happy and healthy life.
Mm,
So the traditional narrative around leadership has been that you are the strong man, you do all the job, you
mm,
kind of rally the troops, you get the job done, and you die. This is basically the classical ontology of a leader in up to this point, and then with a lot of schools. I'm not saying they're all like that, but this is kind of the notion that the traditional psyche has, right? This is kind of immediately what a lot of people imagine when you mention leader. It's a superhuman who does superhuman things. And in this regard, I think adaptive leadership is about telling those people who are in those positions, of course, positions of authority, especially, that they have acquired because of formal job responsibilities or informally, that they're trying to actually help improve their communities, is that
mm,
that doesn't necessarily have to be that way.
mm,
In
mm, mm.
fact, that model is not necessarily sustainable because once that person exits, that whole system is going to collapse.
Mm.
So adaptive leadership really teaches the idea of kind of a distributed uh, uh,
Responsibility.
practice of responsibility
Mm,
where everybody chips in and everybody can practice leadership. There is no notion that only men
mm,
can practice leadership, women, ethnicity, color, etc. Those are absolutely
mm,
not critical conditions. Everybody can do it, right?
mm, mm,
Men, women, old, young, doesn't really matter. So
mm,
in this
mm.
regard, that's the other key differentiation of adaptive leadership, that
Yeah.
it's up with everybody. In terms of those, a lot of people confound um, the fact that leader is often the person who holds a formal job title, right?
Mm,
The CEO, the president, the director of school. etc. That again is confounding the fact that uh, there's a formal role, a formal title, job title that people receive, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the person is actually helping
mm,
his community, his constituency, or her constituency in improving their predicament, their life.
mm, mm,
And in this regard, you can hold the formal job title, but do completely the opposite. And that's what we call irresponsible or counterfeit leadership, right?
mm, mm,
Uh, in our world, as we speak now, we have plenty of examples of people who are actually leading their people in a direction, or let's put it this way, into the cliff,
mm,
into the abyss, which was going to destroy the lives of their people for generations to come,
mm,
right?
mm.
And we can, of course, go into greater detail how does that play out. But I think in that regard, that's a good demonstration that you cannot confuse the formal role and actually the formal authority, let's put it this way, and the practice of leadership. Because so in this regard, you can you can be somebody who is a CEO
Yeah.
and decide to act on environmental issues or on diversity, inclusion, or equity issues in your constituency, right?
Mm,
Uh,
mm,
you do just decide, but you can also decide that's it's not your kind of battle,
mm,
that this would generate too much noise, that
mm,
certain constituencies would be very unhappy. And in this regard, you choose not to act and decide that this is not a practice that you want to pursue. So I
mm,
think
mm,
there is that clear distinction of acting and not acting, and that this is a practice,
mm,
and it's a practice that comes as a function of understanding whether the issue is ripe, whatever the issue is, whether the unique perspectives of multiplicity of stakeholders who have a stake around this issue, and understanding where does this issue stand in the list of priorities of the constituency and the system,
mm,
and whether it's really important to advance it, to kind of bring it up and address this issue, and how critical is this? Is this something that is kind of poses an existential threat to the community, or is this something that can be put in the back burner and dealt in a kind of more developmental
mm,
style, where you allow people to learn and the risks are not high, and you
mm.
can deal with it? Kind of, an example would be COVID was an existential threat, right?
Precisely.
So you really needed to actually calm the people down uh, on the surface, using your authority, uh, but at the same time, you really needed to address the root causes of the problem.
Mm.
So, failure of the other public finance structures,
Healthcare.
systems, and processes for the healthcare,
Yeah.
developing the vaccination programs and infrastructure, mobilizing people
Absolutely.
around educational opportunities,
Mm,
because
mm,
especially with the kids and children, a lot of people were just kind of slowly left out. And of course, the big kind of elephant in the room, it's the climate change, right? How does
mm,
this actually not sidetrack us from addressing the climate change? So
mm,
a good leadership, so to speak, or real leadership, is
mm,
about putting on the surface the most emergency crisis issues, but also addressing these big problems in a way that allows the person
mm,
uh, kind of help the people. Because I think the notion a lot of times is that uh, we go back to the default mode that we are superheroes,
mm,
and we take on the fight and we get basically taken down. And I think the adaptive leadership teaches you how to basically practice this art. And I think the word is really art. There is no blue book or blueprint.
Hmm.
How do you practice in a way that the constituencies allow you to help them move forward at the rate that they can absorb without spitting you out of the system?
Thank you. Thank you, Umar. You know, there's lots that I could really pick up. So, starting from it's a practice of mobilizing people from the current reality to the aspiration, and where people can make a genuine impact at the deepest possible level. You mentioned about it's not about the roles, it's not about the designations one holds, it's not about the caste and the creed and the religion or the gender. You also spoke about how people can come together and work at the root of addressing the challenge, be it the mobilizing people, be it the technology that we are using, be it the climatic condition, be it the healthcare, uh, the presence or the absence of healthcare in any society. You've already given a lot about the attributes of a leader as well. Let me just bridge it to the next question. Would it be a fair assumption to make then what it means is that leading a community has a lot of similarities with leading a organization, has a lot of similarities with leading a country?
I think that, of course, it's about scale, right? It's
Yeah,
the complexity. Uh,
absolutely.
and if you're talking about running a company that is a small business that is just in the city, it's one thing. Of course, if you're talking about MNC or multinational corporation that is,
Yeah,
in 50 different countries, you're talking about the scale. And of course, running a country, USA versus, a Maldives or, etc., or
yeah,
India.
yeah. Or leading community as well, because you'll find a lot of volunteers coming together. So if you look at what's that small difference that makes all the difference?
Well, that's $1 million question, right? We're still in the process. I am still in the process of actually figuring out what is that secret
Hmm,
ingredient.
hmm,
Uh, but I think that the practice of leadership is about, again, I'm going to repeat myself. It's about empowering people,
hmm,
and empowering people is through uh, creating opportunities for the people, community, company, uh, country to understand what values, norms, priorities, beliefs are sacred and they're good, they're productive, so that they can keep it. And values about things in life, as simple as, do I work out? Why should I work out?
hmm,
Whether I should work an honest, decent job or I should pick up arms and go fight.
hmm,
Or, if, I have disagreement with law enforcement, do I follow the formal channels of expressing my grievances or I resist? These are values in simple terms, right?
hmm,
Do I get up and actually go to work every morning to provide food for my family, or the family is so stressful that I can't handle that I leave the family and leave my wife, so that unfortunately that has a trade-off that the person, his family, is going to grow up without the father, right? Or
hmm,
the other way around. So these are fundamental, basic, non-trivial values
hmm,
that highlight, hard-working culture, family values, the importance of providing for your family, etc., and being a valuable member of the community. And then understanding what are the values that are no longer productive.
hmm,
Uh, Productive in a sense that they're actually hurting you and the community,
hmm,
right? And we have plenty of that. Again, things that might have been useful many decades ago or generations before, But because we are humans, we carry on the legacy of the previous generations, and it's ingrained in our DNA,
mm,
through the books, through our teachers, through authorities that surround us. We really need to be able to help these people parse through that and understand that in this current predicament, in the current context, this is good, but this you really need to change. And normally change we're talking about really marginally. Unfortunately, change in a lot of people's mindset is sold as a wholesale thing. But we as practitioners around adaptive leadership, we understand that change happens on the really slim margins, especially
mm,
when you're talking about such sacred things as values, as norms, as priorities.
mm,
And I think that one little thing that you're talking about is really getting surgical, and I mean it very surgical, and finding out what exactly is it out of that slew of software code that is in your head, uh, which command should be erased and
deleted.
replaced with a
Yeah.
with a productive algorithm.
Mm,
I think that's the level of granularity that we need to get to really help people. And I think that this is a really, really difficult job. It takes time to
yeah.
diagnose it well and run millions of test runs
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
really understand what exactly is it. And now multiply that for a community of 100, now scale it to a company which is multinational, and now talk about 1 billion population country that has 1 billion people who have 1
Mm,
billion uh, values and beliefs, which have times 50,000 factor of values and codes that you really need to run. So
mm,
I think in that regard, leadership, of course, at a community level is I'm not saying it's easier.
mm,
The
mm.
scale is different.
Oh,
The
absolutely.
level of the problems and the proximity is not
Mm,
the same, right?
it-
When you go to the country, it becomes the scale of the country. Of course, you're talking about different mega issues and the
yeah.
challenges, and you really need to know how to sift through and surface those issues that are really at the crux of uh, between the progress of the people and regress of the people.
I just love the analogy that you used about that how a small, tiny, minute shift in the code of the person, the software that you spoke about, can actually make a huge difference. And as much as it sounds good, I know the weightage of what you're talking about. It can make a huge difference because a small assumption that I've been living my life from can have a huge impact on the way I show up in the world. And when you brought in the analogy of that in an organization where we have got 10 people, there are, of course, 10 softwares which are running. So it's not only 10, because my assumption is, my understanding is, Umar, there's a lot of group dynamics that come in the game, right? The way I would show up in your presence would be very different from the way I would show up in the presence of person ABC. And the way I would show up in your presence and in the presence of ABC together would be very different. And now just imagine, keep on adding one person at a time. So the way I'm going to show up, the dynamic nature of a human being is going to shift with every new linkage that I'm going to create in my mind in the presence of person A, person B, person C, and person D. One of the questions that I had for you is, because you have done a lot of work with UN women to empower them to address gender equality and violence. I personally believe there's some threads connected to what we have been talking about. What do you think is the missing link here when there's an adequate amount of awareness on this subject worldwide already? And then also, we are struggling to bring in a very simple concept of equality and taking the violence out of the game.
Well, I think that you know, as it is with the global system, and with multiplicity of, different ethnic, cultural backgrounds, regional differences, the question of gender equality is perceived and understood very differently, right, in different contexts. We could start with countries as advanced on this issue as, European Nordic countries that generally do quite well on that. And then slowly transition to the kind of mid-tier countries where it's a little bit patchy, and the process is still happening. It's not a fait accompli where it's already done, but it's a process again. And I think, like anything that it comes to value-driven issues, it's not static. It's not a fact that, if one society has achieved a certain kind of true north, that it's going to stay like that. Or if a country is in a condition where this is still an issue, that it's going to stay like that again. So that gives us a hope that gender equality is something that can be managed and can be achieved in this regard. So I think this is really one key kind of
Mm,
macro level understanding. I think the other important point around this issue is a lot of systems interventions that we have around the world are, of course, they have to be focused. They need to prioritize, the women, the youth, the disabled, race is of course another big issue. So in this regard, I think it's really important for us to think, yes, you need to prioritize, but how do you bring in the rest of the constituency around this issue?
mm,
Because otherwise it would sound like, you're talking blind are talking to the blind.
precisely.
Let me put it right. So the question is, how do we bring the blind and the all-seeing people into the same fray, where the solution of this problem is going to require both parties to engage and work together?
Mm,
And I think in a lot of contexts, from my experience of having done some work, that it can be gender, but it can be any other issue. We unfortunately tend to go and talk to the people with whom we agree, and that's the human nature. You gravitate towards the people who kind of share the same values, and that
yeah,
this is very human, right? We are born at the moment, and we want to be loved
yeah,
right
yeah,
away, right? Nobody wants to be told the bad things, and nobody, wants to have his or her heart rate go up because of disagreements. That's in human nature. So the
yeah.
question is, how do we actually create these bridges or pathways,
Mm,
but also, most critically, generate a mindset that disagreement is not necessarily bad, that conflicts can be actually productive. Of
mm,
course, we're not talking about violent conflicts, but conflicts at the rate of disagreements or expressing concerns or viewpoints is actually a productive process in the evolution of human being.
yeah.
So once you get to that notion, again, we're talking about values, you then can start talking about bringing these different viewpoints and stakeholders around the
Mm,
same table and saying, how do we actually make this no longer an issue? And that requires reaching out across the schisms, across the border, kind of crossing to the other
mm,
side, talking to the people you disagree.
mm,
And leadership, practice of leadership, the art of leadership is about talking to people you disagree with. It's
mm.
not talking to people who you agree with.
Yeah, yeah. So it's not about pattern match, it's about pattern disruption. Because unless I'm able to disrupt the pattern that I'm into, unless I'm willing to disrupt the system that I'm a part of, I'm living in a system where I'm saying, I scratch your back, you scratch my back. And thus, there's no productivity, there's no growth because we are not even coming out of the control zone that we are operating in. Hmm.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I ran a program with the youth for a few years in Kyrgyzstan, and I'm still engaged in this process. It's for young people between 18 and 23-year-old in Kyrgyzstan. And in that program, we have a really interesting kind of design where we break people, the participants of that year, into small cohorts, and they all have to work on a project. It's a leadership program. We're imparting these concepts, but through practical work. And over the last few years, it was interesting because one of the team always ends up actually working around the gender-based violence, harassment, sexual
Hmm.
harassment. And it's interesting that most of the time, the team ends up, of course, working with only women, and that's the group they're trying to kind of protect.
Hmm.
Uh, and the question always is, what about the other side? I mean, how do we actually work with the other side? How do we bring them to the table and how we have a conversation?
Hmm.
So that's always kind of on top of the agenda. And I think this is what adaptive leadership is about, is really uh, finding the pathways for whatever solution you come up with.
Hmm.
And that solution is not going to be eternal, that it is actually sustainable. So
Hmm.
it doesn't collapse. It really addresses the root causes and surfaces the true perspectives of the
Hmm.
other side around this issue. And I think the best way to illustrate is, what problem are you trying to solve? And
Hmm.
this is the critical question that I always ask my clients, my students, is, what problem are you trying to solve by doing something or not doing something?
Hmm.
And in this regard, it was interesting. One of the, again, the same program, they came up with a project of self-defense. So young women would be taught self-defense classes.
Hmm.
Uh, on the surface, it's a great kind of tool, and
Hmm.
I think that, as a solution, as a way to empower women in the short term, this is definitely something that could be
Hmm.
useful. Now, the question is, what problem are you really trying to solve by actually empowering women to
In
use
self-defense.
physical violence
Hmm.
uh, against other physical violence?
Hmm. Hmm.
Are we
Hmm.
really trying to solve the problem?
Yeah.
And how are we actually trying to solve the problem?
Hmm.
And I think that's really the mindset we really need to have a lot around a lot of the programs, solutions
Hmm.
that we as human beings generally tend to gravitate. Our gravitation as human beings is always to uh, fix the problems with from the repertoire of solutions that we already have.
And that too quick
They require
time.
exploration, massive amount of diagnostic, and enormous quantity of improvisation.
Yeah, beautiful. I can so much relate to that. In fact, Ronald Heifert talks about in his book that how we try to solve adaptive challenges with the technical solutions, and thus we end up creating a bigger challenge, not only for ourselves, but for the entire community that we are a part of. Since we are talking about community, since we are talking about addressing the challenges from the lens of adaptive leadership, just curious, there's so much happening in the world. What is it in my hand that I can do as an individual, as a citizen of the country, to make an impact at the national level? Especially when I'm asking this question, I'm saying leveraging adaptive leadership. What are your views on this?
As I mentioned at the beginning, everybody can practice leadership. I think that's the starting point. And I think we live in a world where, again, it seems to us, you know, the earth is kind of shattering on under our feet. Uh, Things are just constantly changing, and we feel like it's a doomsday scenario, and we can't do anything. And I think this is the challenge of our generation, but I think it's also a challenge of the next generation in actually understanding the power of oneself,
Hmm.
the power of the communities, and how one can be an agent of change. I think this is really fundamental at the mindset level, that you understand that it's no longer parochial, small community level world where what happens in this community doesn't affect what happens on the other side of the planet. That's no
Hmm.
longer the case, right? The world is so integrated, so connected, that it's just no longer a scenario. So in this regard, the question is, what can you do within your community
Hmm.
in a way that actually be it educate people or help them understand the what's going on, be it
Hmm.
the effects of grain shortages because of the war,
Hmm.
or the effects of increase of temperature here, and how it is affecting the rest of the world. But most importantly, what can we do
Hmm.
to improve our predicament? Because if we improve our predicament,
Hmm.
we find innovation, we find new solutions
Hmm.
that might have an important scalability or replication in other
Hmm.
contexts. And I think this is really what we really need to drive for at the community level, but also at the country level. And I think this is a challenge that most of the people have kind of drawn back into the mindset of not, kind
Hmm.
of the NIMBY mindset, not in my backyard.
Hmm.
And that's a comfortable space to be in. It's safe. It doesn't have any losses. But I think if we stand a chance of surviving as human civilization,
Hmm.
we need to transition at a macro level to the mindset that what happens here has a ripple effect in other part of the planet, and we need to
Precisely.
understand how to live in the new world. And I think COVID again
Yeah.
was the best way of demonstrating how closely integrated we are, and status quo is no longer an option.
Yeah. I just love the way you brought in the NIM mindset here, that not in my backyard. It reminds me of my conversation. I was in March of 2020, I was in London for a workshop, and there were a couple of other consultants from different countries, and we were just talking about COVID, and they said, "Oh, you don't have to worry, it's happening out there in China." And I said, "No, it's not in China, it's a virus, because virus does not understand geographical boundaries." And least did we expect that in the next 1 month's time, it would spread all over the world. In the next 3 months' time, it would be there in the state that you are living in. In the next a year's time, it will come to your home. So thank you so much for bringing that aspect. Now, Umar, how do you connect adaptive leadership with the concept of interconnection that you spoke about? That how everything is so well interconnected. Now, we can either look at from the perspective of that how everything is interconnected from the three-dimensional world that we live in, be it business, be it geopolitical scenario, the economic scenario that we're living in. Or if I may invite you to look at that from the four-dimensional world, that how spiritually everything is interconnected. So what do you see are the parallels, or the where is the bridge between adaptive leadership and the oneness that we are talking about? I'll leave it to you where you would like to start and where you would like to end.
This is a tough question. Uh, I think that it kind of goes back to the idea that we need to have a more um, awakened world, right? And I think adaptive leadership is really about trying to wake up, trying to help wake up as many people as possible. And I'm going to be even more precise, trying to help the people to help themselves wake up. I think this is really important uh, because the job that one individual has to do about in order to wake up has to be done by that person. I can't wake you up. You need to wake up yourself. Well, I only can help you through certain tools, through language, through interaction, through experiences, uh, to kind of show you what it looks like. But the job, the most difficult part, has to be done by that individual.
Yeah, thank you. As I
Direct.
always share, Umar, that the best gift that you can offer to yourself or to the other person is the gift of self awareness. And in your words, as you are saying, the responsibility is up to us, how we can assist our fellow travelers to wake up to what's not working, wake up to the challenges that we all are facing collectively, wake up to the oneness that we need to create, wake up to the interconnectedness of the world that we are a part of. And we can't afford not to consider that because it's not in my back in my backyard which is going to take us anywhere. So Mo, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your experiences. Such a pleasure interacting with you. Just curious, anything that you may want to share with our audience as the last note?
Well, I think that one thing that I personally have come to um, kind of appreciate in this journey with the practice of leadership that it is a constant journey, and it is actually an endless or continuous process of practicing.
Yeah.
Unless it's kind of like building up your muscle when you're working out, or building up your routine if you're doing any physical activities.
Mm,
It's really exercising those muscles that you have, and in this case, of course, those neurons, the billion neurons
mm,
that you have in your head. It's really developing that tenacity,
mm,
that plasticity in your head, in your neurons in your head, uh, about the fact that what is change, uh, who needs to change,
mm,
how to change, when to change. And change is not necessarily a bad thing, because you're not changing 100%. You're only changing maybe 3% or 5%. So when you get that level of granularity, and I think those challenges that we face are actually going to be less threatening.
mm.
You are not talking about 100%. You're talking about only small percentages that can empower you to actually go forth and conquer the world.
Thank you. I think those are beautiful uh, parting questions for all of us to ponder on.
Thank you very much for having me uh, in this program. I really truly enjoyed the conversation, and I think we can call it conversation because your summaries were spot on. Fantastic way of moderating this conversation, and I wish all the best to you and to your audience in whatever job uh, everybody is doing, and job as in the larger sense of addressing challenges and difficulties in the world that they're facing. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here.